You do not work, so I want a divorce, my husband announced, tossing the thick stack of legal papers onto our kitchen island. Little did he know the silly computer games he thought I was playing for the past 3 years was actually me building a massive tech empire in secret. 2 months later, he married my best friend, only to be left completely speechless when the true owner of their luxury mansion knocked on their door with the sheriff. I am Riley, 27 years old, and until last week, I thought I was married to the man of my dreams. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to protect your heart. The morning sun was streaming through the blinds of our Los Angeles apartment, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. I was standing in the kitchen wearing my usual faded gray hoodie and comfortable sweatpants, quietly pouring myself a cup of dark roast coffee. My mind was already racing through lines of code server architectures and the final logistical details of a project that had consumed my entire existence for the past 36 months. The heavy oak front door swung open with a violent thud, breaking my concentration. Liam stormed into the apartment. He was 29 years old, wearing his signature tailored navy blue suit, his hair perfectly slicked back, radiating a nervous and aggressive energy that instantly put me on high alert. He marched directly toward the kitchen island and slammed a thick manila envelope onto the granite counter. The sudden impact knocked my ceramic mug over. Hot brown liquid spilled across the pristine surface, cascading over the edge and dripping onto the floor. I did not scream or react with shock. I slowly reached for a roll of paper towels and began to wipe up the mess, my silence only seeming to infuriate him further. "Sign them," Liam demanded, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "I am completely exhausted, Riley. I have spent 3 years paying the exorbitant rent for this place while you sit on that couch day after day, staring at a laptop screen, contributing absolutely nothing to this household. I need a partner in life, not a financial dependent. I need someone who actually understands the value of hard work." I kept my eyes on the spilled coffee, methodically wiping the counter clean. Through his blistering tirade, the reality of his perception became glaringly clear. 3 years ago, I had walked away from a stable but suffocating junior analyst position at a traditional corporate firm. I told Liam I had an idea for a software platform, a supply chain management system that could revolutionize retail logistics. I needed time and focus to build it. Liam, a mid-level sales director obsessed with hustle culture, networking events, and the superficial appearance of wealth, viewed my decision as an utter and embarrassing failure. To him, my refusal to put on a pencil skirt and commute to an office every day meant I was a lazy, unmotivated leech. He never bothered to ask what I was coding. He never bothered to look at the complex algorithms filling my screens. He just saw me in sweatpants and assumed I was wasting my life. "You gave up a real career to chase a pipe dream." Liam continued pacing back and forth across the living room. "You refuse to network. You refuse to dress the part of an executive wife. I am out there grinding every single day, closing deals, climbing the corporate ladder, and I come home to a woman who has not even bothered to change out of her pajamas. It is humiliating, Riley. It truly is. I have sacrificed everything to keep a roof over our heads, and I am done carrying your dead weight." I tossed the soaked paper towels into the trash can, processing the absolute betrayal unfolding in front of me. I thought about the thousands of hours I had spent establishing an encrypted, highly efficient software platform that was currently being integrated by major retailers worldwide. I operated completely in secret, using proxy companies and legal shields to mask my identity from aggressive competitors. I also kept it a secret from Liam, knowing his tendency to brag, interfere, and demand control over finances. I wanted to build my empire first, then share the triumph with him when it was secure. Clearly, that was a massive miscalculation on my part. The sharp sound of the front door unlocking interrupted my thoughts. High heels tapped rhythmically against the hardwood floor. Vanessa stepped into the entryway. She was 27 years old, a luxury real estate agent, and supposedly my best friend since college. She was wearing a tailored cream blazer, perfectly manicured, and clutching a pristine designer handbag that cost more than most cars. She walked right past me, zeroed in on Liam, and smoothly slid her hand down his arm, resting her chin lightly on his shoulder. The casual intimacy of the gesture struck me like a physical blow. "Sorry, Riley." Vanessa smirked, her eyes entirely devoid of genuine apology. "But Liam needs a woman who actually works for her lifestyle. He needs someone who understands ambition, someone who can match his energy and help him build a real legacy. We simply want a life of luxury and high society, and you are dragging him down with your lack of drive. You have 2 hours to pack your things and vacate the premises." I stared at the two of them standing together in the sunlit apartment. The man I had vowed to spend my life with, and the woman who had stood beside me as my maid of honor, were casually dismantling my world before I had even finished my morning coffee. They looked so incredibly smug, so completely convinced of their own superiority. They believed they were discarding a worthless burden, trimming the fat, so they could soar to the top of the social hierarchy together. I did not shed a single tear. The deep, agonizing heartbreak I should have felt was instantly replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. I nodded slowly, turning my back on their arrogant expressions, and walked straight toward the master bedroom to gather my life. I pulled my old scuffed black suitcase from the top shelf of the bedroom closet. The zipper caught slightly on the corner, a stark contrast to the flawless designer luggage Vanessa always flaunted during our previous vacations. I systematically opened my dresser drawers, bypassing the few expensive dresses Liam had forced me to buy for his corporate dinners, and reached for my comfortable hoodies, my reliable jeans, and the simple t-shirts I wore while writing code late into the night. Vanessa followed me into the room, leaning against the doorframe, like a warden overseeing an eviction. She unscrewed the cap of a sparkling water bottle she had presumptuously taken from my refrigerator, taking a slow, arrogant sip. "Are you seriously going to pack those horrible rags?" Vanessa asked, gesturing toward my folded jeans with a perfectly manicured finger. "I can give you the contact number for a local charity shelter if you need to donate them. Actually, wait, let me do you a favor." Vanessa set her water bottle on my nightstand and opened her oversized designer wallet. She pulled out 5 crisp $100 bills and tossed them casually onto the unmade bed. "Take it, Riley. Call it a severance package for your failed marriage. It should cover a cheap motel off the interstate for a few nights, until you figure out how to navigate the real world without a man funding your existence." I completely ignored the cash sitting on the mattress. I carefully folded my clothes, placing them into the suitcase. Next, I moved to my small desk in the corner of the room. I packed my battered laptop, its heavy power charger, and a secure encrypted solid-state hard drive. Vanessa had no way of comprehending that the small metal rectangle I slipped into my backpack contained the master administrative keys to a digital kingdom worth a fortune. She continued to chatter behind me, bragging about a massive real estate deal she had supposedly closed yesterday in the Hollywood Hills, boasting about how she was going to upgrade Liam's entire aesthetic. From the living room, Liam began shouting, eager to establish his dominance and ensure I did not try to complicate his new romance. "You need to sign the waiver for spousal support, Riley," he yelled, his footsteps pacing heavily across the floorboards. "You have absolutely zero income, which means you do not even have the resources to hire a decent lawyer. Do not even try to drag this out through the court system, because I will bury you with legal fees you cannot afford. You did not put a single dime into this apartment. My excellent credit score paid for that velvet couch. My executive salary paid for that flat-screen television. Under California law, your lack of financial contribution means you forfeit everything. You walk out of here with exactly what you brought into this marriage, which is absolutely nothing." His profound ignorance of community property laws was almost amusing. He spoke with the unearned confidence of a man who got his legal advice from internet forums and arrogant coworkers. He was demanding that I waive my rights, completely unaware that by doing so, he was simultaneously waiving his own rights to whatever assets I possessed. I closed my suitcase, zipped it shut, and grabbed my backpack. I walked past Vanessa, leaving her pity money on the bed, and stepped back into the kitchen where the divorce papers were waiting on the island. Liam stood there tapping a heavy gold pen against the granite counter, looking impatient. I picked up the pen. I flipped past the preliminary pages, moving directly to the signature page of the marital settlement agreement. My eyes quickly scanned the specific legal clauses his cheap attorney had drafted. There it was, printed clearly, in black and white. The document specifically mandated that all financial ties, assets, debts, and liabilities between the two parties were permanently and irrevocably severed as of the exact date of signing. It explicitly established today as the official legal date of separation. I looked up from the documents. Liam was watching me with a mixture of annoyance and anticipation. Vanessa had glided into the room, wrapping her arms around his waist from behind, resting her chin on his shoulder once again, a picture of victorious malice. I lowered my head and signed my name in a smooth, fluid motion on every required line, officially waiving my right to alimony and agreeing to the immediate legal separation of our marital estate. I dropped the heavy gold pen onto the stack of papers. It made a sharp clattering sound in the quiet apartment. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my set of apartment keys, and tossed them onto the counter right next to the damp, coffee-stained divorce papers. "Keep it all, Liam," I said, my voice incredibly steady and chillingly calm. "Keep the velvet couch, keep the television, keep the apartment, and keep her. Just remember one thing. Signing this document means that from this exact second, our finances are legally and completely severed. You have absolutely no claim to anything I do earn or acquire from this moment forward." Liam let out a harsh, mocking laugh, shaking his head. "Do not worry about me, Riley. I think I will survive without a cut of your $0 income. Just get out of my sight." I grabbed the extended handle of my scuffed black suitcase. I did not offer a tearful goodbye. I did not scream or throw plates. I simply turned on my heel and walked out the front door, leaving the two of them alone in their temporary victory. The heavy door clicked shut behind me, severing the last physical tie to a man who had entirely failed to recognize the value of the woman standing right in front of him. I hit the pavement, the wheels of my suitcase rumbling loudly against the concrete. The Los Angeles morning air was remarkably crisp, carrying the faint scent of ocean salt and exhaust fumes. I pulled my luggage down the bustling sidewalk, weaving through the morning commuters. Business professionals holding leather briefcases and iced coffees rushed past me, completely unaware of the dramatic shift my universe had just undergone. I did not shed a tear. I did not feel a crushing sense of loss. Instead, a massive, overwhelming weight lifted from my shoulders, leaving me feeling lighter than I had in 3 years. I navigated through 3 busy intersections until I found a small, quiet artisan coffee shop tucked away on a side street. The bell above the door chimed as I walked in. The shop was mostly empty, smelling strongly of roasted beans and warm pastries. I ordered a simple black coffee from the barista, paid with cash, and took a seat at a secluded corner table facing the large front window. I placed my coffee on the wooden table, opened my backpack, and pulled out my battered, sticker-covered laptop. I powered on the machine and immediately connected to my secure, encrypted mobile hotspot. My fingers flew across the keyboard, bypassing 3 distinct layers of two-factor authentication and biometric security protocols to access my restricted corporate portal. For the last 3 years, I had operated as a total phantom in the tech industry. I utilized proxy companies' non-disclosure agreements and heavy legal shields to keep my identity masked from aggressive venture capitalists and overly ambitious competitors. I had deliberately kept my operations invisible, primarily to avoid Liam's constant bragging, his insatiable need to control finances, and his tendency to take credit for things he did not build. As the secure portal loaded on my screen, my cell phone buzzed violently against the wooden table. It was a high-priority, heavily encrypted push notification originating from an elite private banking application based out of Zurich, Switzerland. My heart rate accelerated slightly as I picked up the device and unlocked the secure message center. The digital text glowing on my screen was brief, formal, and utterly life-changing. "Dear Riley, We are pleased to inform you that the final acquisition protocols have been executed. The corporate transfer is completely finalized. $45 million has successfully cleared into your private holding account. All estimated tax liabilities have been escrowed accordingly. Congratulations on a monumental achievement. I sat back in the hard wooden chair and stared at the staggering number shining on my small screen. $45 million. The complex supply chain software platform I had meticulously coded while wearing sweatpants on my living room couch. The very same project Liam had repeatedly mocked as a lazy and embarrassing pipe dream had just been wholly acquired by a massive multinational tech conglomerate. The final legal signatures from the buyers had been placed late yesterday evening. The massive transfer of funds had officially cleared the banking systems this morning. I lifted my coffee cup with a steady hand. I looked out the wide front window of the quiet cafe. Across the busy street and a few blocks down, I could just barely make out the glass balcony of the luxury apartment I used to share with Liam. I pictured the two of them standing up there right now. I imagined Liam and Vanessa popping a cheap bottle of celebratory champagne, toasting to their brilliant future, reveling in their successful plot to kick the jobless dead weight out of their glamorous lives. A slow, sharp, and incredibly dangerous smile spread across my face as the absolute irony of the situation washed over me. By ambushing me with those divorce papers this morning, by aggressively forcing me to sign away my rights to spousal support, and most importantly by legally establishing the exact date of marital separation, as today Liam had just inadvertently sealed his own financial doom. He had aggressively severed our marital estate mere hours before the massive corporate payout officially became my personal, unencumbered liquid asset. If Liam had simply waited one more week to execute his cruel betrayal, or if he had been a supportive, decent husband who actually cared to ask about my daily work, he would have been legally entitled to half of that $45 million under California community property laws. He would have walked away with enough wealth to fund his flashy lifestyle for the rest of his natural life. Instead, his gross impatience, his suffocating arrogance, and his blatant infidelity with a manipulative real estate agent had literally cost him $22.5 million. He threw away an absolute fortune for a woman with a fake designer personality and a mountain of hidden credit card debt. I closed my laptop with a satisfying click, slipping it securely back into my backpack, alongside the hard drive. The game was no longer about merely surviving a toxic and unsupportive marriage. The rules of engagement had fundamentally changed. It was now about waiting patiently in the shadows. It was about watching the arrogant people who carelessly discarded me face the absolute, undeniable, and catastrophic consequences of their own monumental hubris. I took one last long sip of my dark coffee, savoring the bitter taste. I stood up, grabbed the handle of my suitcase, and stepped back out into the bright California sunshine, fully prepared to build my new empire. The heavy oak front door of my mother's Pasadena home swung open with a familiar groan. I stepped into the foyer, immediately hit by the overwhelming scent of expensive lavender candles and roasting garlic. Sunday family dinners at Brenda's house were a strict, non-negotiable tradition. For the past 3 years, I had dreaded this weekly ritual. It was an excuse for my mother to parade her pristine suburban life while meticulously dissecting every aspect of mine. I hung my light jacket on the brass rack and made my way down the hallway toward the formal dining room, mentally preparing myself for the usual barrage of questions about my lack of a traditional career. I stepped through the arched doorway and stopped completely frozen in my tracks. Sitting at the long mahogany dining table, laughing warmly and clinking crystal wine glasses, were Liam and Vanessa. Liam was sitting comfortably in the plush armchair at the head of the table, a spot usually reserved for esteemed guests. Vanessa was seated right next to him, wearing a vibrant silk blouse that practically screamed real estate commission, her hand resting intimately on Liam's thigh. My mother Brenda was standing across from them, arranging a massive artisanal cheese board with a bright, genuine smile on her face. A smile she rarely, if ever, directed at me. My sudden appearance in the doorway caused the laughter to die instantly. The clinking of crystal stopped. Vanessa pulled her hand away from Liam's leg and offered me a tight, condescending smile. Liam simply leaned back in his chair, swirling the red wine in his glass with an air of absolute triumph. "What is going on here?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level despite the sharp spike of adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Why are they in your house, Mom?" Brenda let out a long, dramatic sigh. She wiped her hands on a linen towel and glared at me, her eyes immediately scanning up and down my plain gray sweater and dark jeans. "Do not make a scene." Riley, my mother, snapped, her tone dripping with intense disapproval. "I invited them. Liam is practically a son to me. He has been a part of this family for years, and Vanessa is a top-tier real estate agent who is helping me appraise the summer property. They have actual connections and valuable insight. I am not going to banish successful, ambitious people from my home just because you were too lazy to keep your marriage intact." The sheer audacity of her statement hung in the air like heavy smoke. My own mother was openly siding with the man who had blindsided me with divorce papers, and the best friend who had actively destroyed my marriage. He cheated on me with her in my own apartment, I stated clearly, refusing to look away from Brenda. He threw divorce papers at me and kicked me out on the street. "And you invited them to Sunday dinner." "Oh, please grow up," Riley Vanessa chimed in, crossing her arms over her chest. "Liam did not kick you out. He simply stopped funding your permanent vacation. You cannot expect a driven, high-value man to carry your dead weight forever. Your mother understands that. She actually respects people who work for a living." Brenda nodded in enthusiastic agreement with the woman who had slept with her son-in-law. "Vanessa is right, Riley. You sit at home playing on your laptop day after day, while Liam was out building a legitimate future. You forced him into the arms of someone who actually has ambition. A man needs a partner who contributes to his social and financial standing. You refused to get a real job, you refused to dress like a respectable wife, and you refused to attend his corporate events. You literally handed your husband over to a woman who knows how to operate in the real world. You made your bed and now you have to lie in it. Do not expect me to punish Liam for your utter lack of effort." Liam chuckled, a low, arrogant sound that vibrated through the quiet dining room. He reached across the table and selected a piece of aged cheddar from the board. "I told you she would react like a child," Brenda Liam said, chewing his food slowly. "Riley has zero concept of accountability. She thinks the world owes her a free ride. I paid the rent. I paid the utilities. I paid for the groceries. The moment I cut off the cash flow, she plays the ultimate victim." The old Riley, the 26-year-old woman from exactly 1 week ago, would have crumbled. She would have burst into tears, turned around, and run out the front door, suffocated by the profound rejection of her own mother. But the old Riley did not have a $45 million buyout sitting securely in a private Swiss bank account. The old Riley did not hold the absolute financial power to buy and sell everyone in this room 100 times over. Instead of running, I walked calmly toward the dining table. I pulled out the heavy wooden chair directly across from Liam and Vanessa. I sat down, folded my hands neatly on the polished mahogany surface, and looked straight into my ex-husband's eyes. I refused to be chased away from the table. I refused to let them dictate my space. Liam raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised that I had not fled in tears. He quickly masked his shock with a smug, arrogant grin. He reached for the expensive bottle of Napa Valley Cabernet resting in the center of the table. He deliberately poured a generous amount into Vanessa's glass, maintaining unbroken eye contact with me. "Well, since you are insisting on crashing our pleasant evening," Liam sneered, lifting his own glass toward me in a mocking salute. "Let us offer a toast to Riley's continued fun employment. May you eventually find a minimum wage shift that accommodates your rigorous schedule of sleeping in and doing absolutely nothing." Vanessa giggled loudly, clinking her glass against his. Brenda rolled her eyes, shaking her head as she marched back into the kitchen to fetch the main course, muttering under her breath about my complete lack of social grace. I simply smiled back at them. The overwhelming urge to defend my work ethic had completely vanished. I did not need to scream that I had spent the last 3 years building a supply chain software platform that just revolutionized the retail logistics market. I did not need to explain the grueling 16-hour coding sessions, the intense venture capital negotiations, or the ultimate corporate acquisition that had made me liquid beyond their wildest comprehension. Let them believe I was a broke, lazy failure. Their aggressive ignorance was about to become my greatest source of entertainment. Before Liam could deliver another insulting remark, the heavy oak front door groaned open again, followed by the loud, confident sound of booming laughter echoing down the hallway. The golden child had arrived, bringing an entirely new level of hostility to the dining room. Madison swept into the formal dining room a whirlwind of expensive designer perfume and perfectly tousled blonde highlights. She was carrying a massive, elaborate bouquet of imported white lilies, handing them to our mother, as if bestowing a royal gift upon a loyal subject. Brenda practically vibrated with joy. Her entire demeanor transformed instantly from the scowling, critical host who had just berated me into a fawning, adoring parent. Behind Madison stood DeAndre, his presence designed to dominate the physical space of any room he entered. He wore a flawless charcoal gray Tom Ford suit that undoubtedly cost more than my first vehicle. He adjusted his silk tie with a practiced, arrogant flick of his wrist, his posture radiating that specific brand of unearned superiority reserved for corporate lawyers who mistook their billable hours for actual human worth. Madison immediately leaned down to kiss Liam on the cheek, treating him like a victorious brother returning from war. She then offered Vanessa a warm, effusive, sisterly embrace, completely validating my ex-husband's new relationship right in front of my face. Only after these elaborate pleasantries were fully exchanged did Madison allow her gaze to drop to where I sat quietly at the table. Her bright smile evaporated instantly. It was replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated pity mixed with a heavy dose of disgust. DeAndre did not even bother to offer a basic greeting. He pulled out a heavy mahogany chair for his wife, took the seat directly next to her, and immediately locked his cold eyes with mine. His gaze was entirely predatory. He had always despised my presence at these Sunday dinners, viewing my lack of a corporate title and my comfortable clothing as a personal insult to the family's carefully curated prestige. Now that I was a discarded, supposedly broke divorcee, I was nothing more than raw meat thrown into his enclosure for sport. He leaned forward, resting his expensive four-locked gold watch heavily on the table. He did not waste time with small talk or fake pleasantries. He went straight for the jugular. "I heard all about the settlement agreement you signed yesterday," Riley DeAndre announced. His deep voice was smooth, projected loudly enough for the entire table to hear every single syllable. Or should I say the complete and total lack of a settlement agreement. Waiving your right to alimony when you are entirely unemployed, relinquishing your community property rights without securing independent counsel or demanding a forensic accounting of Liam's assets. That is absolute financial suicide. It is essentially a pro-se disaster of epic proportions. I sat perfectly silent, resting my hands in my lap, letting him talk. DeAndre thrived on the sound of his own voice, and interrupting him would only delay his inevitable trap. Under the California Family Code, you had a guaranteed statutory right to seek pendente light support to maintain your standard of living. DeAndre continued using complex legal jargon to assert his intellectual dominance. You could have petitioned for attorney fees. You could have forced a division of the marital accounts. But I guess without a real degree or any basic understanding of contract law and asset division, you simply would not understand how to protect yourself. You just rolled over like a frightened dog and let Liam walk away with a clean slate. You handed him a total legal victory because you were too uneducated to fight back. Liam smirked from the head of the table. He poured himself another generous glass of Cabernet, clearly enjoying the spectacle of DeAndre doing his dirty work for free. Madison patted her husband's arm affectionately, looking at me with wide, mock-sympathetic eyes that concealed a deep well of malice. Brenda watched the exchange with a slight nod of approval, silently agreeing with every harsh critique DeAndre leveled against me. DeAndre reached inside the breast pocket of his tailored suit jacket. He pulled out a thick, custom-embossed business card. With a sharp flick of his wrist, he tossed the heavy cardstock across the polished mahogany table. It spun over the wood, and slid to a halt right next to my water glass. I glanced down at the shiny gold foil lettering displaying his name and his title as senior associate at one of the most ruthless corporate litigation firms in downtown Los Angeles. My firm is actually expanding our facility maintenance contracts this quarter, DeAndre said, a cruel mocking smile slowly stretching across his face. We are currently looking for night shift janitors to clean the executive suites and take out the trash after the real professionals go home. I could put in a good word for you with the building manager. It pays strict minimum wage and you will be on your feet all night, but hey, it is honest work, and God knows you need to start actually working for a living. Madison giggled aloud, the sound sharp and grating in the quiet dining room. You really should take the job, Riley, she added, taking a delicate sip of her sparkling water. You have absolutely no income and zero savings to your name. You cannot expect Mom to let you move back into your childhood bedroom just because you failed at marriage. You need to swallow your pride and take whatever menial labor you can get so you do not end up literally homeless on Skid Row by the end of the month. We are just trying to look out for your reality. I looked down at the gold-embossed business card sitting on the table. I looked up at DeAndre's incredibly smug face, Madison's condescending smile, Liam's triumphant grin, and Brenda's cold, approving nod. The sheer staggering absurdity of a mid-level associate lawyer offering a billionaire CEO a janitorial position was so deliciously ironic that it took every ounce of my willpower not to burst into hysterical laughter right there at the dinner table. They were completely trapped in their own superficial illusion of power. I reached out slowly and placed 2 fingers flat against the thick cardstock. Without breaking eye contact with the arrogant lawyer sitting across from me, I smoothly slid the business card back across the mahogany table until it rested directly in front of DeAndre's plate. No thanks, DeAndre, I said, my voice a quiet, icy blade cutting straight through the thick tension in the room. I actually just closed on a new place in downtown LA. The entire dining room erupted into a chaotic chorus of cruel, mocking laughter. Vanessa literally choked on her expensive red wine. She coughed violently, bringing a crisp white linen napkin to her mouth to catch the crimson liquid she had just spit across her porcelain plate. Her shoulders shook with exaggerated hysterical amusement as she leaned heavily against Liam for physical support. Madison let out a high-pitched, grating shriek of laughter, clapping her manicured hands together like a delighted spectator at a comedy club. Liam simply shook his head, staring at the ceiling with a wide, arrogant grin, acting as if my statement was the most ridiculous absurdity he had ever heard in his entire life. Downtown L.A. Vanessa gasped, wiping a tear of mirth from the corner of her eye, careful not to smudge her designer mascara. Are you absolutely insane? What exactly did you close on, Riley? Did you scrape together enough of Liam's leftover loose change to rent a 200-square-foot janitorial closet next to a commercial dumpster? Did you sign a month-to-month lease for a cardboard box in an alleyway? Vanessa slammed her wine glass down onto the mahogany table, her laughter abruptly transforming into a sharp, malicious sneer. She leaned forward, eager to assert her ultimate dominance. You are completely delusional. Liam and I spent our entire Saturday touring actual properties. We are currently house hunting in Beverly Hills. We are actively negotiating on a $3.5 million modern estate with a zero-edge infinity pool, imported Italian marble countertops, and panoramic views of the canyon. A place for actual adults who have achieved something substantial in life. Not a filthy, crime-ridden loft shared with a dozen stray cats. Liam puffed out his chest, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored shirt. He wrapped his arm tightly around Vanessa's waist, pulling her closer to emphasize their united front. Vanessa has the absolute best real estate connections in the entire state of California, Liam bragged, his voice dripping with unwarranted superiority. We bypass the standard market completely. We are securing a private luxury loan that requires a portfolio you could not even begin to comprehend. We are building an empire, Riley. You are just trying to find a place to sleep. I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact. I slowly picked up my heavy silver fork and my serrated steak knife. With absolute, unbothered precision, I sliced off a perfect piece of the prime rib resting on my plate. The faint rhythmic scraping of the steel blade against the fine china was the only sound I contributed to their chaotic theater. I placed the cut of meat into my mouth and chewed thoughtfully, savoring the rich flavor, completely ignoring the toxic venom they were desperately trying to inject into my bloodstream. My face remained a mask of total stoicism. I did not raise my voice. I did not offer a single word of defense. My profound silence acted as an acoustic vacuum, sucking all the satisfying energy out of their relentless bullying. Watching my total lack of emotional reaction absolutely infuriated my mother. Brenda hated being ignored. She hated when the strict hierarchical script she had written for her perfect suburban family did not play out exactly as she commanded. She hated when the designated scapegoat refused to bleed on cue. Brenda slammed her palm flat against the mahogany table, causing the crystal wine glasses to rattle dangerously. "Stop it right this second!" Brenda demanded. Her face was flushed with intense burning anger, the veins in her neck pulling tight. "Stop lying to my face and stop lying to your family. It is absolutely pathetic. You do not have a job, you have zero credit history, you do not have a husband to fund your lifestyle anymore. You did not close on anything. Making up these ridiculous, desperate fantasies just to save face in front of your highly successful sister and your ex-husband only makes you look completely insane." Brenda pointed a trembling finger directly at my chest, her voice rising to a shrill crescendo. "You are embarrassing me in my own home. Accept your reality. You failed. Your marriage failed because of your profound laziness, and your professional life is non-existent. Stop pretending you are a player in a game you do not even understand. Stop making up these pathetic lies before you ruin this family dinner completely. You need to apologize to everyone at this table for your behavior and beg DeAndre for that minimum wage job." I swallowed my food, slowly resting my silverware neatly on the edge of my plate. I looked directly at my mother, absorbing the full weight of her toxic betrayal. She preferred a comfortable, aesthetically pleasing lie over a messy, complex truth. She preferred a cheating son-in-law with a decent salary over her own flesh and blood. I opened my mouth to deliver a devastatingly calm response, but the sharp clinking of metal against crystal interrupted me. DeAndre was tapping his butter knife against the rim of his wineglass, demanding the immediate attention of the entire room. He was clearly bored with the focus being entirely on my supposed failures. He wanted the spotlight violently redirected back to his own staggering brilliance. "Enough about Riley and her fictional studio apartments," DeAndre announced, standing up slowly from his heavy wooden chair. He buttoned the center button of his Tom Ford suit jacket with a practiced, arrogant flourish. "You all should be raising your glasses and toasting me tonight. Something actually monumental happened in the real corporate world this week, and it is going to change the trajectory of my entire career." Madison immediately clapped her hands together, gazing up at her husband with an expression of pure, unfiltered worship. "Tell them, baby," she urged, practically vibrating with excitement. "Tell them what happened at the firm." DeAndre puffed out his chest, surveying the dining table as if we were his junior employees. "My corporate law firm just finalized the legal acquisition of a massive tech startup. It was the absolute largest and most complex buyout our division has seen this entire fiscal quarter. The founder of this software platform, who remained completely anonymous through the entire blind trust negotiation, walked away with tens of millions of dollars in pure, unencumbered liquid assets. $45 million to be exact. It was a flawless execution of corporate maneuvering." Liam leaned forward in his chair, his eyes widening with genuine greedy respect. $45 million in cash. "That is insane. Did you meet the founder?" DeAndre scoffed, shaking his head with a condescending smirk. "No one met the founder. They operated entirely through heavy legal proxies. But the senior managing partners have assigned me to personally court this newly minted billionaire. They are internally classified in our system strictly as Client 8894. I have been given the exclusive mandate to secure their future wealth management and aggressive litigation portfolio. I am scheduling a direct communication protocol with their team on Monday morning. DeAndre raised his wine glass high into the air, his eyes gleaming with aggressive, unchecked ambition. If I land this whale, I make senior partner by the end of the year. We are talking about managing generational wealth, people. Real, untouchable power. This is the kind of client that buys and sells entire neighborhoods just for the sport of it. I picked up my sparkling water, my fingers wrapping tightly around the cool, condensation-covered glass. I brought the rim to my lips, taking a very slow, very deliberate sip to hide the dangerous, razor-sharp smile threatening to break across my face. DeAndre was standing there practically salivating over the immense wealth and power of client 8894. He was bragging to a room full of people who despised me, completely oblivious to the catastrophic reality of his situation. He was staking his entire professional future, his partnership, and his massive ego on courting a mysterious billionaire. A billionaire who was currently sitting right across the table from him, quietly cutting her prime rib in a faded gray sweater. 2 months passed in a blur of corporate structuring and aggressive expansion. I was sitting in the expansive living room of my downtown Los Angeles penthouse when a thick, heavy envelope arrived in the mail. It was aggressively flashy. The cream cardstock was thick enough to serve as a weapon, covered in gaudy gold foil embossing and sealed with a ridiculous oversized wax stamp. It was an invitation to Liam and Vanessa's wedding. They had mailed it to my mother's house, and Brenda had gleefully forwarded it to my new secure address with a passive-aggressive sticky note attached. She wrote that it would be incredibly immature and bitter of me not to acknowledge their special day and send a high-end gift. The invitation itself was a clear, deliberate insult. Vanessa wanted me there to witness her ultimate victory. She wanted me to sit in the back row wearing something cheap and outdated, weeping over the luxurious life she had stolen from me. She wanted a defeated, broken victim to complete her grand aesthetic of triumph. She needed me to look pathetic so she could look powerful. I did not throw the invitation in the trash. I decided to give her a very different kind of performance. The wedding reception was held at an overly extravagant, highly exclusive country club in Malibu. The entire venue screamed of Vanessa's desperate, frantic need to appear wealthy to her peers. There were massive, towering ice sculptures, ridiculous cascading floral arches imported from overseas, and a fleet of rented luxury sports cars parked out front just for the visual effect. I stepped out of my privately hired black car and handed my silk wrap to the valet. I did not wear the faded gray hoodies or the comfortable sweatpants Liam had relentlessly despised. I wore a breathtaking custom-tailored designer gown. The dress was a deep, rich, emerald green silk that moved like liquid water with every step I took. There were absolutely no flashy logos, no gaudy sequins, and no desperate brand names plastered across the fabric. The pure, razor-sharp cut and the immaculate quality of the silk screamed stealth wealth. It was the exact kind of garment that only people with actual generational money could recognize and afford. I walked into the grand reception hall just as the cocktail hour was reaching its peak. The heavy mahogany doors swung open, and I stepped onto the polished marble floor. The reaction from the room was immediate and palpable. Guests who had previously known me only as Liam's quiet, supposedly unemployed wife turned to stare in utter disbelief. The low hum of polite conversation rippled and shifted into hushed, frantic whispers. I did not shrink under their heavy gaze. I kept my posture perfect, radiating a terrifying, untouchable confidence. I owned the space. Across the massive hall, standing near an absurdly large champagne fountain, was Liam. He held a crystal glass in his hand, laughing loudly with some of his corporate sales colleagues. He turned his head and caught sight of me navigating the crowd. His jaw literally dropped open. The glass in his hand tilted dangerously, spilling expensive liquor onto his polished leather shoes. He stared at me as if he were looking at a complete stranger. His eyes raked over the flawless, expensive cut of my gown, completely failing to comprehend how the woman he had kicked out with absolutely nothing was suddenly radiating absolute power and wealth. Vanessa was holding court near the heavily decorated bridal table. She wore a dress that looked more like a bedazzled meringue than a wedding gown. It was covered in excessive lace and heavy, blinding rhinestones that looked remarkably cheap under the harsh ballroom lighting. She followed Liam's stunned gaze and spotted me standing in the center of the room. Her fake, radiant bridal smile vanished instantly. A deep, furious glare twisted her features. She had fully expected me to show up looking completely miserable and entirely broke. My radiant appearance was a direct physical assault on her fragile ego. Before I could even make it across the room to offer my congratulations, two familiar figures intercepted my path. My mother Brenda and my older sister Madison flanked me like angry guard dogs. They grabbed my arms and aggressively pulled me behind a massive, towering arrangement of white roses, violently dragging me out of the direct line of sight of the bridal party. "What on earth do you think you are doing here, Riley?" Madison hissed, her fingers digging sharply into my wrist. "And what exactly is that you are wearing? You look completely ridiculous trying to pass off cheap knockoffs as high fashion. Everyone in this room is staring at you out of sheer pity." Brenda chimed in immediately, her face flushed with deep, resentful anger. "You are purposely trying to embarrass us, Riley. Showing up here in a fake designer dress trying to upstage the bride is a new low even for someone as pathetic as you. Vanessa was kind enough to extend an invitation out of pure grace, and you use it to make a mockery of her special day. Who did you borrow money from to rent that trashy dress? Because we all know you are completely flat broke and unemployed. Stop bringing your humiliating desperation into high-class environments." I looked at my mother and my sister. Their faces were twisted with a frantic need to keep me in the small, pathetic box they had built for me. They desperately needed me to be the ultimate failure, so they could feel successful in their own hollow lives. I calmly reached over and physically detached Madison's hand from my arm, peeling her fingers back with cold, silent authority. I did not defend the origin of my emerald silk gown. I did not explain that the dress I was wearing cost more than Madison's entire wedding budget. I simply gave them a look of pure, unbothered amusement. I smoothly brushed past them without saying a single word. I walked straight across the polished marble floor, completely ignoring the glaring eyes of my furious family. I went directly to the VIP bar, reserved exclusively for the bridal party. I leaned gracefully against the mahogany counter and ordered a glass of their most exclusive top-shelf champagne. I took a slow sip, looking out over the crowded room, radiating a terrifying, untouchable confidence. The cool crystal flute felt perfect in my hand. I watched the room settle as the waitstaff began pouring the obligatory toast champagne. The heavy crystal chandeliers dimmed slightly, and a sharp feedback whine echoed from the stage speakers. Vanessa snatched the silver microphone from the best man, completely disregarding the traditional speech order. She marched to the center of the pristine white dance floor, the heavy rhinestones of her gown catching the spotlight like a disco ball. Liam followed closely behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder, playing the role of the devoted, wildly successful groom. Vanessa tapped the microphone, demanding the absolute silence of the 200 guests packed into the Malibu Country Club. "Thank you all for being here to witness the start of our incredible journey," she announced, her voice echoing loudly through the massive hall. "Liam and I have had a whirlwind year. It takes a lot of drive and a very specific caliber of ambition to achieve what we have in such a short amount of time." She paused, letting the crowd hang on her every word. My mother Brenda was sitting at the front table, nodding enthusiastically, her eyes shining with tears of absolute pride. Madison and DeAndre were right beside her, raising their glasses in premature celebration. "As many of you know, Liam and I are not just building a marriage today," Vanessa continued, her tone shifting from bridal joy to aggressive corporate bragging. "We are building an absolute empire. I am thrilled to officially announce that just yesterday we secured our dream home. We closed on a spectacular $3.5 million mansion right in the heart of Beverly Hills." A chorus of impressed gasps and loud applause rippled through the reception hall. Vanessa soaked it up, her smile widening into a predatory grin. She pointed a manicured finger toward the crowd, specifically aiming her gesture at her colleagues from the real estate agency. "Now securing a property of that magnitude usually takes a lifetime of saving," she boasted, her voice dripping with unchecked arrogance. But when you are a top producer in this market, the normal rules simply do not apply. I utilized my exclusive industry connections to bypass the standard banking red tape entirely. We did not even need massive upfront capital. I personally negotiated a private luxury loan through a boutique financial firm. They looked at our projected earning potential, recognized my industry standing, and handed us the keys to our future. That is how real power operates. Liam kissed her cheek, beaming at the crowd. He looked so incredibly proud of himself, completely convinced that he had finally secured the high-status life he always believed he deserved. But Vanessa was not finished. The spotlight was hers, and she intended to use it to execute the final stage of her victory lap. She turned her body, scanning the room until her eyes locked onto me, standing alone by the VIP bar in my emerald silk gown. The triumphant smile on her face twisted into something deeply cruel and vicious. She raised her free hand and pointed the silver microphone directly toward my section of the room. "Before we toast, I want to give a special shout-out to a very specific guest tonight," Vanessa announced, her voice ringing out with crystal clarity. "I want to give a special shout-out to Liam's ex. Thank you for stepping aside so a real woman could build an empire with him. May you eventually find a minimum wage job that suits you." The entire room gasped collectively. 200 heads whipped around, following the direction of her gaze, until every single pair of eyes in the venue was completely fixed on me. The silence in the room became thick and suffocating. My mother covered her mouth with her hand, though her eyes glinted with malicious satisfaction. For a split second, the crowd was entirely paralyzed by the sheer, unadulterated cruelty of her statement. Then, a few of Liam's corporate friends in the back let out a low chuckle. That sound broke the tension, and the room echoed with a wave of awkward, cruel laughter. Madison was openly giggling, leaning against DeAndre, who watched me with the same predatory amusement he had shown at Sunday dinner. They were all waiting for me to break. They expected my face to crumble. They expected me to drop my glass, burst into humiliated tears, and run out the heavy mahogany doors in total defeat. I did not move a single inch. I stood perfectly still under the crushing weight of their collective judgment. The emerald silk of my gown caught the ambient light as I slowly, deliberately raised my crystal flute in the air. I looked straight into Vanessa's furious, desperate eyes. I offered her a slight, acknowledging nod, holding my glass high in a silent, perfectly composed salute to the bride. Vanessa visibly faltered. Her smug expression cracked for a fraction of a second, entirely unsettled by my absolute lack of emotional reaction. She had fired her best shot, and it had simply bounced off my armor. Frowning, she quickly brought her own glass to her lips and took a large, aggressive gulp of champagne to cover her sudden insecurity. As I watched the golden liquid slide down her throat, a terrifying sense of calm washed over me. Let her drink. Let her celebrate her newly acquired Beverly Hills mansion. Let her bask in the applause of 200 people. Let my family laugh at my supposed minimum wage existence. They had absolutely no idea about the catastrophic reality of the situation they were celebrating. Vanessa had just publicly admitted to bypassing traditional banking red tape using her industry connections. She had just bragged about securing a private luxury loan without massive upfront capital, based purely on projected earning potential. I knew Liam's exact financial standing because I had practically memorized the forensic accounting files during our divorce proceedings just months prior. Liam had a decent corporate salary, but he possessed absolutely zero liquid assets, significant credit card debt, and a severely over-leveraged auto loan. There was no mathematical reality on this planet where Liam's legitimate income could legally qualify him as a co-signer for a multi-million-dollar mortgage. Vanessa had not used her industry connections to negotiate a brilliant deal. She had utilized her real estate access to commit massive federal-level mortgage fraud. She had systematically falsified Liam's income documents, fabricated their shared tax returns, and intentionally lied to a boutique private lender to secure a loan they could never legally afford. She had just stood on a stage holding a microphone and publicly confessed to a federal felony in front of 200 witnesses. Lowering the crystal flute from my lips, I let the cool golden champagne burn down my throat. The sheer irony of Vanessa's public confession was intoxicating. She genuinely believed her aggressive industry networking had outsmarted the traditional banking system. She thought she had found a brilliant, sophisticated loophole, a quiet, discreet boutique lender willing to overlook her new husband's catastrophic credit score and mountain of personal debt in exchange for slightly elevated interest rates. She believed she was a mastermind playing chess, while the rest of the world played checkers. What Vanessa did not know, what absolutely no one in this room of jeering, superficial guests knew, was the exact nature of that boutique financial firm. When I walked away from the acquisition of my supply chain software platform with $45 million, I did not just let the massive influx of capital sit stagnant in a Swiss bank account. I immediately diversified. I established Vanguard Horizon, a private, aggressively managed investment firm designed to multiply my wealth. One of our newly formed subsidiaries specifically targeted high-yield short-term real estate bridge loans for luxury properties in the Southern California market. It was a highly lucrative sector, catering to clients who needed fast liquidity and absolute discretion. Less than 3 weeks ago, my chief underwriting officer had flagged a particularly bold application for a $3.5 million Beverly Hills estate. He brought it directly to my desk because the applicants were requesting highly irregular terms, attempting to leverage future unearned real estate commissions as current liquid assets. When I opened the heavily encrypted digital file and saw Liam and Vanessa's names printed in bold black letters across the top of the screen, I actually had to instruct my underwriter to leave the room so he would not witness my reaction. Sitting alone in my downtown Los Angeles penthouse office, I had meticulously reviewed every single page of their submitted application. It was a breathtaking masterpiece of sheer desperation and blatant deceit. Vanessa had completely fabricated Liam's corporate W-2 forms, wildly inflating his mid-level salary to match executive suite compensation. She had blatantly doctored 3 years of their individual tax returns and submitted forged banking statements showing cash reserves that simply did not exist anywhere in reality. By standard federal banking regulations, their application should have been instantly rejected and immediately forwarded to federal authorities for criminal investigation. But I did not reject it. I saw an opportunity far more devastating than a simple loan denial. Operating through my corporate shell company cloaked entirely in layers of legal anonymity, I personally approved their fraudulent loan application. I gave them the exact financial rope they were so desperately begging for. However, before the final paperwork was sent over, I instructed my legal team to embed the contract with brutally strict, legally binding, immediate recall clauses. These specific non-negotiable covenants stated that the lender reserved the absolute right to demand immediate full repayment of the principal balance at any given time, triggered by a mandatory zero-notice income verification audit. Now looking across the crowded Malibu reception hall, I watched Vanessa glowing in the spotlight of her own manufactured triumph. She was twirling on the pristine white dance floor in her heavy rhinestone gown, clinging tightly to a man who was nothing more than a financial anchor she had illegally tied around her own neck. They had signed the final closing documents just yesterday afternoon. The funds had been fully transferred from my subsidiary's holding account to the escrow company. They had officially taken legal possession of a multi-million-dollar asset using stolen credibility and fabricated wealth. The crime was completely finished. The ink was completely dry. I set my empty champagne flute down on the polished mahogany surface of the VIP bar. Reaching into the discreet hidden seam pocket of my emerald silk gown, I pulled out my phone. The screen illuminated my face with a soft, cool glow, shielding my expression from the surrounding crowd of celebrating wedding guests. I bypassed my personal apps and opened the highly encrypted two-factor authentication software. I logged directly into the Vanguard Horizon CEO portal. The sleek, dark interface loaded instantly, displaying a live dashboard of our active lending portfolios. I navigated through the secure client directory, scrolling past dozens of high-net-worth accounts until I found the specific mortgage file for the Beverly Hills property assigned to Liam and Vanessa. My thumb hovered over the glowing screen. I looked up one last time, watching my mother clap her hands to the music, watching DeAndre boast to a nearby table about his impending partnership, and watching my ex-husband spin his new bride across the floor in a cloud of stolen luxury. They felt entirely untouchable. They believed they had won. With a single decisive motion, I selected their mortgage file and flagged the account for a code red fraud audit. I hit execute. The digital confirmation flashed green across my screen, locking the irreversible audit protocol deep into the Vanguard Horizon mainframe. I slid the device back into the hidden pocket of my emerald gown and turned my attention back to the physical world. The atmosphere inside the Malibu Country Club had shifted from a formal reception into a loud, aggressively decadent spectacle. The 10-piece live band had transitioned to a heavy thumping bass track, vibrating the crystal glasses left abandoned on the cocktail tables. I walked slowly along the perimeter of the room, watching the disastrous financial reality unfold in real time. Liam had positioned himself right in the center of the pristine white dance floor, flanked by the catering director and the venue manager. He was waving his arms, speaking at a volume deliberately designed to carry over the loud music. "Bring out the reserve bottles," Liam demanded, snapping his fingers toward an empty tiered glass structure being wheeled onto the floor by a team of nervous waiters. "I want a $50,000 champagne tower right here in the center of the room, and I want it flowing continuously for the next hour. Pour the good stuff. Put it directly on the house tab. We are celebrating a completely new tax bracket tonight." A group of his corporate sales buddies howled and clapped him on the back like frat boys. They were practically tripping over themselves to worship a man who had just signed his own financial death warrant. DeAndre was standing right in the middle of that circle, nursing a glass of scotch. He nodded approvingly at Liam's absurd display of fabricated wealth, clearly impressed by the sheer audacity of spending 50 grand on fermented grape juice. But DeAndre could never allow someone else to hold the alpha position for too long. He stepped forward, adjusting his silk tie and clapping Liam heavily on the shoulder. "Enjoy the new house," Liam DeAndre projected smoothly, ensuring the surrounding circle of men hung on his every single word. "It is a solid starter home, but you all need to prepare yourselves to be toasting me by this time next week. I just got the official email confirmation from the senior partners. I am fully scheduled for a direct phone call with client 8894 on Monday morning. Once I officially lock down that anonymous founder and their $45 million portfolio, a Beverly Hills mortgage is going to look like pocket change. I will be buying the entire block." The men erupted into cheers again, raising their glasses to DeAndre's monumental ego. I watched the scene with cold, clinical detachment. The supreme irony of the moment was almost too rich to endure. DeAndre was standing there desperately bragging about courting a mysterious, untouchable billionaire, completely oblivious to the fact that client 8894 was currently standing 20 feet away from him, silently sipping sparkling water. Deciding I had witnessed enough of their tragic financial comedy for 1 hour, I turned and made my way toward the quiet, marble-lined corridor leading to the venue's restrooms. The heavy bass of the band muffled slightly as I stepped into the hallway. The air was cooler here, thick with the scent of expensive imported floral arrangements. Before I could even reach the brass handle of the restroom door, a sharp, manicured hand clamped down hard on my bare bicep. The polished fingernails dug painfully into my skin. I whipped my head around to find my mother, Brenda. Her face was completely flushed with a mix of red wine and intense, seething rage. She had clearly been tracking my movements, waiting for an opportunity to ambush me away from the prying eyes of the other guests. "You need to leave right now," Brenda hissed, her voice vibrating with barely suppressed fury. She yanked my arm, trying to physically pull me toward the rear exit doors. "I am not asking you, Riley. I am telling you. You are completely ruining this entire evening. Your sister is humiliated, DeAndre is deeply embarrassed, and Vanessa is absolutely furious." I stood my ground, planting my heels firmly into the marble floor. I did not pull away immediately. I let her exert her force, highlighting her sheer lack of physical or emotional leverage. "You showing up here in that fake dress is a desperate cry for attention," Brenda continued, her voice echoing sharply against the stone walls. "You could not stand the fact that Liam moved on to a woman who actually contributes to his success. You could not stomach the reality that Madison married a brilliant soon-to-be senior partner while you are completely destitute. You parading around the VIP bar in a cheap knockoff gown is the most pathetic, humiliating stunt you have ever pulled. It makes our entire family look like white trash opportunists. Call your rideshare. Get out the back door before I have the club security drag you off the premises. I looked down at her hand gripping my arm. I did not rush. I did not raise my voice or match her frantic, desperate energy. I smoothly reached over with my opposite hand and wrapped my fingers around her wrist. With slow, terrifying, and methodical strength, I physically peeled her hand off my arm, bending her fingers backward, just enough to make her gasp and release her grip completely. I smoothed the flawless silk of my sleeve, completely unbothered by her physical threat. I took one step forward, forcing Brenda to take a step back until her shoulders bumped against the cold marble wall of the corridor. I leaned in close, bringing my face mere inches from hers. The scent of her heavy lavender perfume was suffocating, but I did not blink. You might want to distance yourself from the newlyweds. Mother, I whispered, my voice dropping to a glacial, terrifyingly calm register. I would highly suggest you stop tying your social status to that $3.5 million Beverly Hills estate you are so incredibly proud of. Brenda stared at me, her eyes darting nervously. What are you talking about? She demanded, though her voice shook slightly, betraying her sudden uncertainty. Stop speaking in riddles, Riley. I tilted my head, keeping my eyes locked dead on hers. Fraud is a federal crime, Mother, I stated clearly, pronouncing every single syllable with lethal precision. Forging income documents and falsifying tax returns to secure a multi-million-dollar private loan carries a mandatory prison sentence. The digital audit has already been triggered. The funds are going to be recalled, the authorities are going to be notified, and the financial fallout is going to be very, very messy. Brenda stared at me, completely frozen. Her mouth hung slightly open, her mind desperately trying to process the magnitude of the words I had just spoken. The absolute certainty in my voice shattered her aggressive facade, leaving behind a profound, terrifying confusion mixed with a rapidly rising, undeniable panic. I did not wait for my mother to formulate a response to the devastating reality I had just dropped in her lap. There was absolutely nothing left for her to say. I released my physical and emotional hold on the conversation, turned on my heel, and calmly walked away. I left Brenda gasping for air against the cold marble wall of the corridor, her desperate need to align herself with Vanessa's fabricated wealth, finally chaining her to a rapidly sinking ship. I felt not a single ounce of pity. The heavy thumping bass of the reception band grew louder as I approached the grand mahogany doors of the main hall. I did not step back onto the pristine white dance floor. I positioned myself comfortably in the shadows of the arched doorway, serving as a silent, untouchable spectator, watching the final act of the play I had so carefully orchestrated. In the dead center of the room, the towering pyramid of crystal champagne glasses stood completely empty, gleaming sharply under the venue spotlights. Beside it, the country club manager stood with impeccable posture, holding a sleek wireless payment terminal. Liam was currently the center of attention, surrounded by his circle of corporate sales colleagues, and DeAndre, who was watching the display with calculated interest. Liam reached into his tailored tuxedo jacket and pulled out a heavy metallic black credit card with an arrogant, performative flick of his wrist. He handed it to the manager with a loud, booming laugh, loudly joking to his friends about the terrible burden of high-tier luxury spending. The manager slid the heavy card into the chip reader with practiced efficiency. The machine processed the transaction for 3 excruciating seconds before emitting a sharp, flat electronic beep. The small screen flashed a bright red error message. Declined. The booming laughter from Liam's colleagues abruptly faltered. A sudden, highly uncomfortable silence fell over the immediate circle of men. Liam's smug smile violently twitched. He quickly snatched the card back, his face flushing a dull, mottled red under the harsh venue lights. He muttered a frantic excuse about bank security algorithms flagging unusually large purchases, desperately trying to play the part of the inconvenienced wealthy elite. His hands were noticeably trembling as he pulled his wallet back out, retrieving a secondary platinum card. He shoved the plastic into the machine himself. The terminal beeped again. A harsh, unforgiving negative tone. Declined. The venue manager took a distinct professional step back, his demeanor cooling into something much more rigid. DeAndre shifted his weight, his eyes narrowing as he analyzed the sudden, deeply humiliating lack of liquidity happening right in front of his face. Liam was beginning to actively sweat, aggressively tapping the screen of the terminal, demanding the manager try running the transaction manually through the system. Across the room, Vanessa had finally noticed the catastrophic delay. The music was playing, the guests were waiting, and her highly anticipated $50,000 champagne toast was publicly stalling in front of 200 wealthy peers. She marched aggressively across the dance floor, her heavy rhinestone gown swishing with every furious step. She shoved her way through the circle of silent men, loudly demanding to know why the reserve bottles were not being poured into her crystal tower. Liam stammered, his voice dropping to a frantic, terrified hiss as he tried to explain the sudden banking glitch. Vanessa shot him a look of pure, unadulterated disgust. She snatched the payment terminal directly from the manager's hands. Reaching into the hidden bodice of her gown, she pulled out a slim silver card holder containing her own premium business credit cards, the accounts directly tied to her allegedly massive real estate commissions. She ripped out a card and swiped it through the magnetic reader with vicious force. The machine flashed red immediately, declined. Vanessa's breath hitched audibly. Her eyes darted frantically around the room, registering the growing crowd of guests who were now actively watching the bride repeatedly fail to pay for her own reception stunt. She jammed a second card into the chip reader. Declined. She pulled out a third. Declined. Every single piece of plastic she owned was instantly, aggressively rejected by the global banking network. The venue manager finally reached out and firmly reclaimed his payment terminal, quietly but sternly stating that the country club required a valid, authorized form of payment before opening their high-end reserve inventory. Absolute desperation clawed at Vanessa's meticulously contoured features. She pulled her smartphone from her bridle clutch, her thumbs flying across the screen as she frantically tried to log into her banking application to manually authorize the blocked transactions. But she never made it past her home screen. A high-priority push notification suddenly overrode her display. Then an email alert dropped down from the top banner. Then a direct text message. Even from my vantage point in the doorway, I could see the exact moment her entire reality violently shattered. The harsh blue light of her phone screen illuminated the absolute paralyzing terror washing over her face. The notification was unmistakable, sent directly through the encrypted banking channels. Urgent. All corporate and personal assets frozen pending federal investigation. Vanguard Horizon Fraud Division. Code Red protocol initiated. The color violently drained from Vanessa's face, leaving her looking like a ghost trapped in a bedazzled meringue. The phone slipped slightly in her trembling grip. She lunged forward and grabbed Liam by the bicep, her manicured nails digging so deeply into his tuxedo jacket that he physically winced in pain. She yanked him away from the venue manager, pulling him away from DeAndre, away from his corporate friends, and dragging him right next to the massive empty pyramid of crystal champagne glasses. Their hushed, frantic whispers were no longer about bank glitches or temporary security holds. They were arguing in the desperate, terrified tones of people who realize the solid ground has permanently vanished beneath their feet. Liam forcefully grabbed Vanessa's phone to read the glowing screen himself. His knees physically buckled. He swayed backward, catching himself against the table, holding the empty glasses, causing the delicate crystal to rattle ominously. Pure, unadulterated terror completely replaced his arrogant swagger. He stared at his new bride, not with love or devotion, but with the horrified, sickening realization that she had just legally anchored him to a federal financial crime. I watched them panic from the shadows of the mahogany doors. The trap I had meticulously built over the past 2 months had snapped shut with bone-crushing, irreversible force. There was no loophole to exploit. There was no industry connection that could save them from a direct federal audit of a fabricated multi-million-dollar loan. They were completely entirely ruined. Really? I did not need to stay for the grand finale. The federal authorities and the venue security would handle the rest of the evening. I turned my back on the blazing, beautiful wreckage of their lives. I walked back down the marble corridor, gliding right past my mother, who was still slumped against the wall, staring blankly into space, as her hollow dreams of high society status evaporated. I handed my ticket to the valet, wrapped my silk shawl around my shoulders, and stepped out into the cool, quiet Malibu night. The ocean air whipping through my open car windows tasted like pure, unadulterated freedom. I merged onto the Pacific Coast Highway, leaving the country club and the smoldering ruins of my ex-husband's new life far behind me. I did not spend the weekend wondering what happened after I walked out the door. I simply went back to my penthouse, brewed a fresh pot of coffee, and watched the digital shockwaves register on my corporate servers. 3 days later, the reality of their situation finally caught up to Liam and Vanessa on a global scale. They had flown out to Paris the morning after the wedding, completely oblivious to the financial guillotine swinging down toward their necks. They had booked the most expensive penthouse suite at the Four Seasons Hotel George V, intending to spend 2 weeks parading their fabricated power couple aesthetic across Europe. I knew exactly where they were because my secure banking portal was actively logging every single one of their desperate, frantic attempts to spend money they no longer possessed. Sitting at my desk, I watched the live transaction log light up with bright red rejection codes. A charge for €500 at a high-end Parisian boutique. Declined. €100 for premium room service. Declined. Then came the massive catastrophic failure. A €12,000 attempted authorization by the hotel's front desk to settle their mounting suite balance. Denied. The system flagged the exact moment the hotel management cut off their room access. I could easily picture the scene unfolding in the opulent marble lobby of the George V. Vanessa, likely wearing an impractical designer outfit she had purchased on credit, shrieking at a thoroughly unimpressed French concierge. Liam sweating through his expensive vacation linen, fruitlessly aggressively jamming every frozen piece of plastic he owned into the card reader, while security quietly closed in around them. The hotel was not going to let them simply walk away from a 5-figure bill. The threat of local police intervention for defrauding a luxury establishment must have been paralyzing. With zero access to cash-frozen bank accounts and useless credit cards, their grand European fairy tale instantly devolved into a hostage situation. Vanessa was forced to do the one thing she hated more than anything else in the world. She had to swallow her massive inflated pride and call her parents back in California. Her parents were normal middle-class people who had likely already drained their modest savings to help fund the Malibu wedding spectacle. Now they were receiving a hysterical, weeping phone call from Paris, begging for a direct wire transfer just to keep their daughter out of a French jail. Her father had to liquidate his emergency retirement fund and wire the cash directly to the hotel management. He then had to purchase 2 emergency same-day flights back to Los Angeles just to get them out of the country. There were no luxury sleeper pods available for a last-minute booking. There was no priority boarding and no complimentary champagne. Liam and Vanessa were shoved onto a crowded commercial airliner assigned to the absolute last row of economy class right next to the lavatories. They spent 11 agonizing hours crammed into middle seats, their knees pressed against the seats in front of them, breathing in recycled air and listening to a crying toddler 2 rows ahead. The forced proximity in that cramped, miserable space stripped away the final remnants of their glamorous facade. The stress fractured their newlywed bliss into a million jagged pieces, and they violently turned on each other. "You completely destroyed my life, Liam," hissed his voice vibrating with rage over the roar of the jet engines. "You forged federal documents, Vanessa. You tied my legal name to a massive felony. My credit score is annihilated. My career is going to be over the second the firm finds out my assets are frozen pending a fraud investigation." Vanessa did not shrink back or offer a tearful apology. The mask of the supportive, adoring bride dissolved, revealing the vicious, calculating opportunist underneath. She snapped her head toward him, her eyes flashing with pure contempt. Do not dare play the innocent victim with me, Liam, she snarled, her voice sharp and venomous. I had to forge those income verifications because your actual financial reality is pathetic. You parade around your office acting like a master of the universe, but you are nothing but a mid-level drone drowning in consumer debt. You could never actually provide the high-status lifestyle you constantly demand. I had to manufacture a millionaire on paper because you are entirely incapable of being one in real life. I did what I had to do to get us into Beverly Hills. The brutal, unvarnished truth hit Liam like a physical blow. The woman he had left me for the woman he claimed was his true equal had just openly admitted she viewed him as a financially impotent stepping stone. Their entire relationship was built on a foundation of mutual delusion, and now they were both drowning in the reality of their own lies. They spent the rest of the 11-hour flight in hostile, suffocating silence. When the plane finally touched down at LAX, the tension between them was practically radioactive. They grabbed their carry-on bags and marched through the customs terminal, exhausted, humiliated, and bracing for the fallout. As soon as they cleared the secure zone, Liam pulled his phone from his pocket and disabled airplane mode. Vanessa did the same. A violent cascade of chimes and vibration alerts instantly erupted from both of their devices. The notifications did not just contain standard banking alerts regarding frozen funds. The primary message dominating their lock screens was a direct, automated legal mandate generated by the Vanguard Horizon system. Sitting in my penthouse, I watched the delivery receipt confirm that the notices had been successfully opened. Liam stood frozen in the middle of the crowded baggage claim area, his face draining of all color as he read the bold red text stamped across his digital portal. Urgent legal notice. Code red fraud audit confirmed. Immediate recall clause activated. The private lender they had so gleefully defrauded was officially executing their contractual rights. The message was explicitly clear. Due to the confirmed submission of fraudulent income documentation and a material breach of contract, the lender was demanding the full immediate repayment of the $3.5 million principal. Liam and Vanessa had exactly 48 hours to produce $3.5 million in untraceable liquid cash. If the deadline passed without full payment, the Beverly Hills property would be placed into immediate aggressive foreclosure, and their unredacted loan file would be permanently surrendered to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. 72 hours after I wrapped my silk shawl around my shoulders and stepped out into that cool, quiet Malibu night, the real world had aggressively reasserted itself upon my family. I was currently lounging on the expansive teak balcony of my actual residence, a sprawling multi-level penthouse overlooking the glittering, endless expanse of the Los Angeles skyline. The floor-to-ceiling glass doors were pushed wide open, letting the warm evening breeze sweep through the minimalist, custom-designed living room behind me. I held a cup of black coffee, resting my bare feet against the edge of the glass railing, watching the headlights of millions of commuters carving rivers of red and gold through the city below. My phone, resting on the smooth surface of the glass coffee table, had been vibrating almost continuously since dawn. The notifications were a relentless, vibrating barrage of missed calls, frantic text messages, and blocked numbers. I had let every single one of them go to voicemail, preferring the quiet, steady hum of the city over the desperate, escalating noise of a collapsing fraud. When the screen illuminated for the 50th time that day, flashing my mother's name in bright white letters, I finally decided I was ready to engage. I picked up the sleek device, swiped the green icon, and pressed the phone to my ear without uttering a single word of greeting. "What did you do?" Brenda shrieked. Her voice was completely unhinged, tearing through the phone speaker with a raw, guttural panic that I had never heard from her before. She did not bother with a hello. There was no pretense of maternal concern, no attempt at her usual condescending civility. "What did you actually do?" "Riley, Vanessa is in tears. Liam is completely catatonic in the guest bedroom. Vanessa says you reported them to the IRS out of pure jealousy. They are going to lose the house. You are a monster, Riley. A complete vindictive monster." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee, letting her hysteria echo into the open air of my balcony. The contrast between her frantic, hyperventilating screams and the serene, elevated quiet of my penthouse was striking. "I did not report them out of jealousy, Mother," I replied, my voice deliberately smooth, flat, and completely devoid of any emotional traction. "I reported them because forging federal tax documents and fabricating corporate W-2s to secure a multi-million-dollar mortgage is a massive financial crime. I merely expedited the inevitable audit. They built a house of cards on a foundation of federal fraud. Gravity did the rest." "You destroyed your own sister," Brenda wailed, her breath catching in her throat, her voice vibrating with a terrifying mix of rage and absolute desperation. "You could not stand seeing her happy. You could not tolerate that she found a wealthy man and secured a life you could never achieve. You ruined her wedding, you ruined her marriage, and now they are facing federal charges. You did this just to punish us." I leaned back against the plush cushions of the outdoor sofa. I did not yell back. I did not raise my voice or match her frenetic, desperate energy. Instead, I let a cold, calculated silence stretch across the line until her erratic, heavy breathing was the only sound I could hear. "You always had a remarkable talent for selective blindness, Mother," I stated clearly, letting each word land with precise, heavy weight. "You spent the last 20 years turning a completely blind eye while Vanessa and Madison tore me apart for their own amusement." I stood up from the sofa and walked to the edge of the glass railing. "When Vanessa stole the money I saved for my college textbooks to buy designer handbags, you told me to stop being so materialistic. When Madison publicly mocked my entry-level apartment and told the entire extended family I was a pathetic financial failure, you nodded along and praised her brilliant business acumen. You watched them bully, belittle, and systematically ostracize me for my entire adult life, and you smiled through it all because they looked good doing it. You permitted their cruelty because it fit your narrative." "That is completely different," Brenda stammered, her voice shaking violently, grasping at straws. "They were just teasing you. They are your sisters. They were pushing you to be better." "They were cruel," I corrected her sharply, stripping away her pathetic excuses with surgical precision. "And you enabled them because you valued their fake glittering facade over the truth. You chose the aesthetic of success over actual integrity, Mom. Now you get to watch their aesthetics burn." "Riley, please." Brenda's voice suddenly cracked, shifting violently from rage to a pathetic whimpering plea. "They are going to take everything. The private lenders are demanding $3.5 million by tomorrow. Liam's firm suspended him without pay pending an internal review. You have to fix this. You have to call whoever you called and tell them it was a mistake. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Please, Riley, we will lose everything." "There is no fixing a federal crime, Mother," I said, my tone as unforgiving as concrete. "And even if there were, I would not lift a single finger to save them. You tied your entire identity to their fraudulent wealth. You get to sink with it." I moved the phone away from my ear, hovering my thumb over the red end call button. Brenda was still screaming, her voice a tinny, desperate noise echoing from the speaker, begging me not to hang up, demanding I save her precious family image. I tapped the screen, cutting her off mid-sentence, and dropped the phone back onto the glass table. The silence that followed was deeply satisfying. I closed my eyes, letting the cool night air wash over me. The toxic, suffocating grip my family had held over me for 3 decades was officially broken. Exactly 30 seconds later, the screen of my phone illuminated again. It began vibrating against the glass, the harsh buzzing disrupting the quiet of the balcony. I glanced down. It was not Brenda. It was not Vanessa. It was DeAndre. I picked up the device, highly curious to hear how Madison's arrogant, soon-to-be senior partner husband was processing the spectacular, highly public implosion of his new in-laws. I swiped to answer, bringing the phone to my ear. Riley DeAndre stated, his deep, intimidating lawyer voice, attempting to radiate absolute intimidating authority. "Do not speak. Just listen to me very carefully." I remained silent, highly amused by his aggressive posturing. "I am representing Vanessa and Liam," he continued, projecting a tone of lethal legal menace, rolling out his corporate vocabulary like a weapon. I have spent the last 48 hours reviewing the catastrophic damage you intentionally inflicted upon my clients. I am preparing a defamation and tortious interference lawsuit against you. You intentionally sabotaged a private financial contract and destroyed a man's corporate career based on malicious, unverified claims. I am going to bury you in litigation. I will personally see to it that you are bankrupt for the rest of your life. Do you understand me? You are dealing with forces you cannot even begin to comprehend. Riley. DeAndre barked, the absolute certainty of his own superiority dripping from every single syllable. His voice was a booming, theatrical weapon fine-tuned in courtrooms to bully opposing counsel and terrify witnesses. My firm represents the elite. We crush multinational conglomerates for sport. You are an absolute nobody. You are a bitter, destitute, jealous little girl playing a dangerous game with high-level corporate players, and you just stepped directly onto a minefield. I did not interrupt him. I pulled my phone away from my ear, switched it to speakerphone, and set it down on the smooth, cool surface of the massive quartz kitchen island. I walked away from the balcony, my bare feet padding softly against the imported Brazilian hardwood floors of my living room. The sprawling penthouse was an immaculate testament to actual quiet wealth, soaring 20-foot ceilings, custom-commissioned modern art, and panoramic glass walls that framed the glittering Los Angeles skyline. I opened the glass door of my custom refrigeration unit, retrieving a bottle of imported sparkling water. Do you know what my billable rate is, Riley? DeAndre demanded, his voice echoing from the speaker on the counter. $2,000 an hour. That is what my time is worth to the most powerful executives in this state. And I am going to dedicate hundreds of hours of my personal time to tearing your pathetic life apart piece by piece. I am going to file for an emergency injunction first thing Monday morning. I am going to sue you for tortious interference with a business contract, defamation per se, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. I poured the chilled carbonated water into a heavy crystal glass, the ice clinking softly against the sides. I will subpoena every single bank record, email, and text message you have ever generated. DeAndre continued, his rage escalating into a fever pitch of arrogant grandstanding. I will drag you into deposition after deposition until you break. By the time I am finished litigating this, you will owe my firm more in legal fees and punitive damages than you will earn in 3 lifetimes. I will garnish whatever pathetic minimum wage salary you scrape together. I will have your cheap, rundown apartment seized to settle the judgment. You will be sleeping on the streets of Los Angeles. I leaned against the quartz island, staring out at the city lights. It was fascinating to listen to a man who was so thoroughly convinced of his own manufactured supremacy. DeAndre was relying on his title, his expensive suits, and the imposing reputation of his corporate law firm to act as a shield. He was completely blind to the fact that his entire worldview was based on an illusion. He honestly believed he was speaking to a powerless victim. You thought you were so incredibly clever, didn't you? DeAndre sneered, his tone dropping an octave into a menacing, patronizing growl. Walking into a country club in some cheap knockoff dress, whispering lies to a venue manager, trying to tear down Vanessa and Liam just because your own life is a miserable, solitary failure. Madison told me exactly what kind of toxic, vindictive person you are. She warned me that you were a parasite who resented anyone else's success. But you picked the absolute wrong family to cross. I am going to make a brutal, highly public example out of you. He finally paused, likely waiting for me to burst into tears, to beg for mercy, or to frantically apologize. He was waiting for the satisfying sound of my submission. I picked up my crystal glass. Riley sips her sparkling water. The carbonation burned pleasantly down my throat, cool and refreshing. I let the heavy, loaded silence stretch across the cellular connection for 5 excruciating seconds. I wanted him to feel the utter lack of fear radiating from my end of the line. Are you quite finished? I asked, my voice smooth, flat, and entirely unbothered. DeAndre scoffed loudly. I haven't even started. DeAndre, I said, dropping the polite familial inflection I had maintained for years around him and my sister. I shifted my tone, adopting the glacial, commanding cadence I exclusively reserved for hostile boardroom takeovers and terminating incompetent executives. It was a voice that did not negotiate. It was a voice that radiated absolute, uncompromising authority. Before you draft a single word of that lawsuit, before you waste another second of my time with your rehearsed entry-level legal intimidation tactics, I highly suggest you sit down at your desk. What are you talking about? He snapped, his arrogant rhythm slightly disrupted by the sudden terrifying calm in my voice. I highly suggest you open your firm's internal email portal, I instructed, pronouncing every single syllable with lethal surgical precision. Look for a priority-flagged urgent directive sent directly to your senior managing partner. It was sent 5 minutes ago. Look for the file attached from client 8894. There was a sharp pause on the line. I could almost hear the gears grinding in his head as his brain tried to process the specific sequence of numbers I had just spoken. Client 8894. DeAndre scoffed, a harsh barking laugh escaping his lips, though it sounded slightly more forced this time. What in the hell does my anonymous billionaire client have to do with a broke, white trash loser like you? I chuckled darkly, the sound echoing off the high ceilings of my immaculate penthouse. The sheer delicious irony of his blind arrogance was an absolute masterpiece. I had spent 2 years paying his firm a retainer fee that rivaled the GDP of a small island nation, and he was currently threatening to sue me into bankruptcy. Open the email, DeAndre, I ordered, my voice hardening into a blade of pure ice. Read it out loud to me. A sharp, breathy scoff crackled through the speaker of my phone. The sound was thick with absolute disdain. I could picture DeAndre perfectly in his lavish, mahogany-paneled home office, likely rolling his eyes while adjusting his expensive silk tie. I heard the heavy creak of a leather executive chair as he shifted his weight, followed by the muffled thump of him placing his phone onto his desk. He had put me on speakerphone. He wanted his hands free to navigate his computer, thoroughly convinced he was about to call my bluff and deliver the final crushing blow to my ego. You are completely unhinged, Riley. DeAndre muttered, the rapid clacking of a mechanical keyboard echoing across the cellular connection. You honestly think you can just spout random numbers and pretend you have some secret connection to a high-net-worth individual? Madison warned me you were prone to hysterical delusions. This is pathetic. I am logging into the portal right now just to prove to you how absolutely insane you sound. I leaned forward slightly, resting my elbows against the cool quartz of the kitchen island. I did not offer a single word of defense. I simply waited. The clacking of the keys stopped. A heavy, hollow silence stretched over the line. 10 seconds passed, then 15. Well, DeAndre, I prompted softly, swirling the sparkling water in my crystal glass. The ice clinked like tiny celebratory chimes in the quiet of my penthouse. Are we struggling with reading comprehension tonight? His breathing, previously steady and arrogant, had suddenly hitched. It became shallow, ragged, and undeniably audible through the speaker. I heard a faint, high-pitched electronic chime from his end of the line, the unmistakable notification sound of a priority-flagged internal email arriving from the senior executive suite of his law firm. Read the subject line, I commanded, stripping all warmth from my voice. Urgent directive, DeAndre croaked. His voice sounded entirely different. The booming, theatrical courtroom bravado had instantly evaporated, replaced by the tight, restricted tone of a man whose throat was rapidly closing. Urgent directive regarding client 8894. Immediate action required. Open it, I said. I heard the faint click of a computer mouse. Read it out loud, DeAndre. Every single word. Do not skip a single syllable. He swallowed hard. The sound was loud and heavy over the speakerphone. To the executive committee and senior partners, he began, his voice trembling so violently that the words actually fractured as he spoke them. Client 8894 has issued a direct non-negotiable ultimatum to our firm regarding our current retention agreement. Effective immediately, the client demands the execution of 2 mandatory directives. Failure to comply will result in the immediate termination of our retainer and the transfer of their entire $45 million portfolio to rival counsel. DeAndre stopped reading. The silence was thick, suffocating, and heavy with the dawning realization that he had walked blindly into a meticulously laid trap. "Keep reading," I commanded. My voice was a glacial whip cutting through his panic. "What is the first demand?" He took a jagged, shuddering breath. "Directive 1. He read, his voice dropping to a terrified, breathless whisper. "The immediate, unceremonious termination of Senior Associate DeAndre." He stopped again. I could hear a faint whimpering sound escaping his throat. "Read the grounds for termination, counselor," I pushed, feeling a dark, profound satisfaction settling into my bones. Grounds for termination include gross unprofessionalism, severe conflict of interest, and documented hostile threatening conduct directed toward the primary shareholder of the client corporation. DeAndre was hyperventilating now. The rapid, shallow breaths echoed loudly. "This is a joke. This has to be a joke. You hacked the server. You got someone in IT to spoof the managing partner's address." I took another slow sip of my water. "I did not hack anything, DeAndre. I simply leveraged the power of a $45 million asset portfolio. Now proceed to the second demand. You are a lawyer. Finish reading the brief." "No," he gasped. "Riley, please, read it." His voice was completely broken, stripped of every ounce of arrogance he had weaponized against me for years. "Directive 2, he stammered, coughing slightly as he forced the words out of his constricted throat. "The firm is hereby formally retained by Client 8894 to initiate aggressive, uncompromising litigation. We are instructed to dedicate our top litigation partners to aggressively prosecute Vanessa and Liam for federal wire fraud, mortgage fraud, and civil conspiracy." The sheer poetry of the moment was magnificent. DeAndre had just threatened to personally sue me into bankruptcy on behalf of Vanessa and Liam. But in the span of 60 seconds, he had not only been fired from his prestigious job, but his own former firm was now legally bound to destroy the very people he had promised to protect. He was legally barred from representing his sister-in-law because his own firm had just been weaponized against her. It was the ultimate inescapable conflict of interest. "Riley." DeAndre begged, his voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. "Please, I just bought a house. Madison is expecting a certain lifestyle. I am on the partner track. You cannot do this. Who is client 8894? How do you know them? How are you doing this to me?" I set my crystal glass down on the island. I leaned in close to the microphone of my phone, ensuring he could hear the absolute terrifying clarity in my voice. "Scroll to the very bottom of that email, DeAndre. Look at the attached retention agreement. Look at the authorized digital signature that just authorized your termination and initiated the federal prosecution of your new brother-in-law. Read the names stamped at the bottom of the page." I heard the frantic, desperate clicking of his computer mouse as he scrolled down the digital document. A sharp, violent gasp ripped through the speaker. He completely stopped breathing. The total silence from his end of the line was absolute. He was staring at a reality his arrogant mind could simply not comprehend. "Read the name, DeAndre," I whispered. "Riley," he choked out, his voice sounding like a man standing on the gallows. "Riley, Founder and Chief Executive Officer, Vanguard Horizon." The realization hit him with the devastating force of a runaway freight train. He had not just threatened a nobody, he had aggressively threatened to bankrupt the mysterious, untouchable billionaire client his senior partners were currently bending over backward to appease. He had personally declared war on the single most powerful entity in his corporate ecosystem. A sharp clattering noise echoed through the speaker. It was the heavy, distinct sound of a smartphone slipping from a sweaty, violently trembling hand and crashing onto the polished surface of a mahogany desk. The device lay face up on the polished mahogany, its screen casting a harsh, artificial glow across the scattered legal briefs DeAndre had intended to use as weapons against me. He was completely paralyzed. The oxygen had been violently vacuumed from his lungs. He stared at the glowing screen as if it were an active explosive, his mind fracturing under the weight of an impossible reality. Through the dropped phone, my voice echoed in DeAndre's silent, lavish office. It was crisp, metallic, and utterly devoid of mercy. Like I told you at dinner, DeAndre, you do not have the class to recognize power when it is sitting right across from you. He opened his mouth, but his vocal cords refused to engage. The man who had built an entire identity on bullying witnesses, dominating courtrooms, and terrorizing junior associates was reduced to a gasping, hyperventilating shell. He lunged for the phone, his fingers scrambling uselessly against the smooth glass, desperate to plead to bargain, to offer whatever groveling apology he thought might reverse the catastrophic damage he had just inflicted upon himself. But I had already disconnected the call. The dial tone hummed a flat, monotonous note of absolute finality. Before DeAndre could even attempt to redial my number, a sharp, authoritative knock cracked against the heavy oak doors of his corner office. There was no waiting for an invitation. The doors were pushed open with aggressive, unceremonious force. DeAndre snapped his head up, the blood completely draining from his face. Standing in the doorway was the firm's senior managing partner. He was a man who did not tolerate failure, and who absolutely despised being embarrassed in front of his elite clientele. Right now, his expression radiated pure, unadulterated disgust. He was flanked by two massive, unsmiling building security guards wearing tactical earpieces and dark tailored suits. DeAndre scrambled to his feet, his knees buckling slightly, knocking his expensive leather executive chair backward into the floor-to-ceiling window. "Sir," he stammered, holding his hands up in a frantic, placating gesture. "Sir, I can explain. It is a misunderstanding, a massive personal misunderstanding with my wife's sister. I can fix this. Just give me 5 minutes to get her back on the phone." The managing partner did not step into the room. He remained positioned at the threshold, treating DeAndre's office as if it were a contaminated quarantine zone. "There is nothing to explain." The managing partner stated, his voice a low, lethal rumble that carried down the entirely silent hallway behind him. "You just directly threatened the founder and chief executive of Vanguard Horizon. You threatened to sue a client whose $45 million portfolio represents a cornerstone of this firm's quarterly revenue. You used corporate resources to conduct a personal vendetta against a billionaire who holds our retention contract in the palm of her hand." DeAndre gripped the edge of his mahogany desk, his knuckles turning white as he tried to remain upright. "But I am on the partner track," he pleaded, his voice breaking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. "I bring in millions in billable hours. You cannot do this over a personal dispute." "DeAndre, hand over your badge and your firm credit card." The managing partner ordered, his tone clinically cold, slicing through DeAndre's desperate rationalizations. "You are a liability. Escort him out." The security guards stepped forward, their presence radiating physical intimidation. Slowly, with violently trembling fingers, DeAndre reached to his lapel and unclipped his magnetic access badge. He pulled his leather wallet from his trousers, sliding out the platinum corporate card he loved to flash at expensive steakhouses to impress his in-laws. He placed both items on the corner of his desk. One of the security guards tossed a flattened cardboard box onto the desk. It popped open, a cheap, degrading receptacle for a man who had spent his entire life obsessing over high-status aesthetics. "You have exactly 3 minutes to gather your personal effects," the managing partner commanded. "Do not touch your computer. Do not attempt to access the firm's servers. Our IT department locked you out of the system the second client 8894 hit. Send on her directive. You no longer exist here." DeAndre moved like a sleepwalker. He dropped his silver monogrammed letter opener, a few framed photos of Madison and his crystal paperweight into the cardboard box. His hands shook so violently that the heavy glass rattled against the cardboard base. He reached for the framed Ivy League law degree hanging on the wall, but a security guard stepped forward, tapping his wrist, indicating his time was up. The guards flanked DeAndre, forcing him to pick up his box and march out of his corner office. The hallway outside, usually buzzing with the frantic, loud energy of paralegals and junior associates, was completely, terrifyingly silent. Word of the managing partner's urgent directive had spread through the internal corporate network like a wildfire. Every single office door was open. Every single cubicle was occupied. Dozens of his peers, subordinates, and rivals stood watching him. The junior associates he had mercilessly berated, the paralegals he had forced to work through holidays, the opposing counsel he had mocked in the break room, they were all standing in the corridor. Their eyes tracked his every move, their expressions a mixture of shock, schadenfreude, and absolute contempt. DeAndre felt his face burn with a radioactive, consuming humiliation. He was being paraded out of his own law firm in front of everyone he had ever deemed inferior. He was carrying his entire ruined career in a cheap cardboard box, his expensive leather shoes squeaking awkwardly against the polished marble floors. There were no sympathetic whispers. There were no goodbyes. The senior associates who had actively competed with him for the partner track were openly smirking. They marched him into the glass elevator. As the doors slid shut, cutting him off from the world he had sacrificed his actual integrity to conquer, he stared at his own reflection in the glass. The reality of his situation began to crush his chest. Madison was currently shopping for a multi-million-dollar estate in Calabasas, based on his projected partner salary. He had a massive Carnote Country Club dues, and a lifestyle built entirely on credit and corporate prestige. He was now unemployed, fired for cause, and completely radioactive in the legal community. No reputable firm in the state would ever hire an associate who had been terminated for harassing a billionaire client. The elevator plummeted toward the ground floor, matching the exact devastating trajectory of his life. Stepping out onto the unforgiving concrete of the Los Angeles sidewalk, the blazing afternoon sun hit his face. The security guards blocked the revolving glass doors, crossing their arms permanently, severing his access to the elite corporate echelon. DeAndre stood completely alone on the crowded pavement, clutching his cardboard box, suffocating under the brutal realization that he had just destroyed his own career by arrogantly mocking the most powerful client his firm had ever seen. 1 week had passed since I severed the final thread connecting me to the parasitic ecosystem of my former life. I did not need a physical invitation to know exactly what was unfolding inside the massive $3.5 million Beverly Hills estate that Friday night. My legal team had already provided me with the precise minute-by-minute execution schedule. The Vanguard Horizon Auditing Division leaves absolutely nothing to chance. Liam and Vanessa had chosen to double down on their delusion. Facing imminent foreclosure, frozen bank accounts, and a looming federal fraud investigation, they did the only thing they knew how to do. They threw a party. It was billed as an exclusive, intimate housewarming celebration, designed specifically to project an image of unshakable wealth to their high society friends, Liam's law firm colleagues, and the extended family. They hired a live string quartet to play softly in the grand foyer. They ordered towering displays of imported caviar and cases of vintage top-tier champagne. They were actively writing checks on credit lines that were hours away from bouncing, desperately trying to stall the inevitable collapse by keeping up appearances. They believed that if they looked wealthy enough, the reality of their bankruptcy would simply vanish. The atmosphere inside the sprawling marble-floored living room was thick with a toxic, suffocating tension. The aesthetic of success was perfectly curated, but the reality beneath it was rapidly, visibly decaying. Liam stood near the towering stone fireplace, looking less like a master of the universe and more like a hostage trapped inside a custom-tailored Italian suit. His skin was incredibly pale, his eyes darting nervously toward the entrance every time a server walked past with a tray of hors d'oeuvres. He was clutching a tumbler of whiskey with white-knuckled intensity, engaging in hollow robotic conversations with his firm's senior partners. He was terrified they would discover his assets were completely frozen and his career was hanging by a single frayed thread. Across the room, Brenda and Madison were huddled together near the extravagant floral arrangements, vibrating with a frantic, nervous energy. They were sipping their champagne far too quickly, exchanging tight, panicked whispers when they thought no one was watching. Brenda kept adjusting her heavy diamond necklace, her eyes constantly scanning the crowd for any signs of judgment or suspicion. They knew the foundation was cracking, but they were determined to smile blindly through the structural failure of their precious family image. But the most spectacular display of quiet devastation belonged to DeAndre. He was stationed permanently at the mahogany wet bar, aggressively consuming his fourth glass of neat scotch. The imposing, arrogant corporate shark who had threatened to bankrupt me just a week prior was entirely gone. His expensive silk tie was loosened and slightly crooked. A visible sheen of cold sweat coated his forehead, catching the light from the crystal chandeliers overhead. He was drinking heavily to numb the crushing, terrifying reality of his situation. He had spent the entire week hiding his termination from Madison. He left the house every morning in his tailored suits, pretending to go to the prestigious firm that had publicly humiliated and discarded him. He spent his days sitting in his luxury car in random parking lots, frantically and fruitlessly calling rival law firms, only to discover that Vanguard Horizon's legal team had ensured his professional reputation was permanently annihilated. No one would take his calls. He was completely blacklisted in the corporate legal community. Now he stood in the corner of the lavish party, his eyes bloodshot and haunted, terrified of the exact moment his wife would realize the luxurious high-status lifestyle she demanded was entirely gone. Vanessa, however, absolutely refused to acknowledge the sinking ship. She was operating on pure, unadulterated narcissism. Wearing a stunning floor-length designer gown that she definitely could not afford, she floated through the crowd. Her laughter rang out slightly too loud, her smile stretched tight and brittle across her face. She needed validation. She desperately needed the room to look at her and see power, wealth, and absolute control. She needed to prove to everyone and herself that she had won. As the evening reached its peak, Vanessa moved to the center of the grand foyer, positioning herself beneath the largest chandelier. She picked up a silver spoon and clinked it sharply against her crystal champagne flute. The sharp, high-pitched ringing cut through the low murmur of conversation and the soft melodies of the string quartet. The music faded into an awkward silence as all eyes turned toward her. "Thank you all so much for coming tonight to celebrate our beautiful new home," Vanessa announced, her voice projecting with a practiced theatrical confidence. She wrapped her free arm around Liam, pulling him close. He looked like he wanted the marble floor to open up and swallow him whole. "We wanted to bring our favorite people together in this incredible space," she continued, her eyes flashing with a defiant, arrogant light as she surveyed the crowd of elite guests. "I know there have been some absurd, completely ridiculous rumors floating around our social circles this week regarding our transition into this property. I want to assure everyone here right now that the minor banking error regarding our accounts has been completely and permanently resolved." Brenda let out a loud, highly exaggerated sigh of relief from the corner, nodding vigorously to the guests standing around her, playing her part in the theatrical deception. "We are moving forward, stronger, wealthier, and more successful than ever," Vanessa declared, raising her glass high into the air, her voice dripping with hubris. "To new beginnings, absolute prosperity, and leaving the past exactly where it belongs." A few guests raised their glasses, murmuring polite agreements, preparing to take a sip of their expensive champagne. They never got the chance. Right as the toast peaked, the heavy, solid oak front doors of the mansion did not just open. They were pushed inward with a sudden, violent force that sent a shockwave of cold air tearing through the grand foyer. The remaining silence in the room instantly crystallized into pure, unadulterated shock. It was not a group of late-arriving guests. It was not a forgotten catering delivery. Stepping through the threshold, their heavy boots hitting the polished marble floor with a synchronized, intimidating thud, were two fully uniformed Los Angeles County sheriffs. Their hands rested casually on their duty belts, their expressions radiating absolute, uncompromising authority. Directly behind them marched a team of 4 sharp-suited corporate liquidators. They were stone-faced, moving with mechanical, ruthless efficiency. Each of them carried thick, heavily bound legal mandates and silver digital clipboards flashing with red execution codes. Vanessa's champagne flute slipped from her trembling fingers. It hit the marble floor, shattering into 1,000 glittering, jagged pieces. The sharp, crystalline crash of Vanessa's champagne flute hitting the marble floor shattered the dead, suffocating silence of the grand foyer. 1,000 glittering, jagged pieces of crystal scattered across the stone, perfectly mirroring the instantaneous destruction of her fabricated reality. The elite guests stood completely frozen, their expensive drinks suspended in midair, their eyes darting wildly between the two armed Los Angeles County sheriffs and the grim, unsmiling team of corporate liquidators blocking the only exit. The two uniformed deputies took a synchronized heavy step apart, deliberately clearing a wide path through the entrance. Stepping through the center of the sheriffs was me. I wore a flawless, razor-sharp, white-tailored power suit, the crisp, immaculate lines of the fabric standing in stark, deliberate contrast to the dark, escalating panic currently consuming the room. I walked into the foyer with slow, measured steps, my heels clicking rhythmically against the imported marble. I did not look like the discarded, heavily criticized sister they had spent years mocking. I looked like an executioner who had just locked the doors to the chamber. The collective gasp from my family was audible over the soft, confused murmurs of the crowd. Brenda actually stumbled backward into a massive floral arrangement, her hand flying to her chest as if she were having a cardiac event. Madison dropped her cocktail entirely, the liquid splashing over her designer heels. But Liam, desperately trying to preserve whatever shred of masculine authority he had left in front of his firm's senior partners, snapped out of his paralysis. His face flushed a violent, mottled crimson. He stormed forward, pushing past a terrified waiter, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. "What the hell are you doing trespassing in my house?" Liam roared, his voice cracking with a volatile mixture of terror and performative outrage. "Get out of here right now before I have you arrested. You have absolutely no right to step foot on this property." I stopped walking, planting myself directly beneath the center of the cascading crystal chandelier. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice or match his frantic, sweating energy. Instead, I gave a subtle nod to the lead liquidator. The team immediately fanned out across the room, pulling out rolls of bright red asset seizure tags and slapping them onto the expensive rented furniture and modern art pieces adorning the walls. I slowly looked around the lavish, over-designed home, taking in the towering ceilings and the sheer scale of the financial fraud they had committed to stand inside it. "Your house," I asked, the words slicing through the heavy, tense air with icy, unforgiving precision. "Liam, you really should read the fine print on your private mortgage contracts before you gleefully sign them. You pledged this entire estate based on completely fabricated, heavily forged federal income documents. You committed a massive felony to buy a lifestyle you could never afford." The senior partners from his law firm, who had been listening intently, immediately began backing away from him. I watched their expressions harden into absolute professional disgust. One of them pulled out a phone, likely drafting an email to their human resources department to ensure Liam was permanently barred from the premises. I turned my gaze directly back to Liam, watching the remaining color drain from his face until he looked like a corpse. As the founder and chief executive officer of Vanguard Horizon, the private lending firm that currently owns every single cent of your fraudulent debt, I am here to execute the immediate, unconditional repossession of this asset, I stated, radiating absolute authority. You have exactly 30 minutes to collect your personal clothing and vacate the premises before the sheriffs physically remove you for trespassing. The silence that followed was absolute and deeply terrifying. The guest people who had spent the last hour drinking Liam and Vanessa's expensive champagne and listening to their fabricated success stories were now actively scrambling toward the coat check. They were witnessing a brutal financial slaughter, and nobody wanted to be caught in the crossfire. Vanessa let out a shrill, guttural scream that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. The carefully constructed mask of the elegant, wealthy hostess completely dissolved, revealing the terrified, cornered opportunist beneath. She grabbed Liam's arm, shaking him violently, demanding he fix it, but he was completely catatonic. He stared at me with wide, unblinking eyes, finally comprehending that his corporate career and his freedom were entirely gone. Realizing her husband was utterly useless, Vanessa wildly scanned the room. Her eyes locked onto the one person she believed still possessed any actual power. "Do something," Vanessa shrieked, pointing a manicured, trembling finger at Madison's husband, who was still standing near the mahogany wet bar. "You are a senior lawyer. Stop her. File an injunction. Call the police. Do your damn job and throw this jealous, pathetic psycho out of my house." Every eye in the room pivoted to DeAndre. Madison rushed to his side, grabbing his suit jacket, fully expecting him to unleash his trademark corporate bullying tactics to save their family's reputation. She looked up at him, waiting for the booming, authoritative voice that had terrorized me for years to put me back in my place. But DeAndre did not yell. He did not issue a single legal threat or quote a single statute. Instead, his hand opened. His heavy crystal whiskey glass slipped from his grip, thudding against the floor and rolling harmlessly across an expensive Persian rug. His knees buckled entirely. In front of the armed sheriffs, the corporate liquidators, his confused wife, and dozens of high society guests, the arrogant, supposedly untouchable attorney collapsed to his knees right there on the marble floor. Madison gasped, grabbing his shoulder frantically, trying to pull him back up to his feet, absolutely mortified by the pathetic display. DeAndre ignored her entirely. The room watched in absolute horrified fascination as tears began streaming freely down his face. He crawled forward slightly on the stone floor, looking up at me with an expression of pure, broken desperation. The imposing corporate shark had been reduced to a weeping, hyperventilating shell of a man. "Please!" Riley. DeAndre sobbed, his voice, a pathetic, high-pitched whimper that carried perfectly through the dead silence of the foyer. "Please, I am begging you. I will do anything. Please tell the managing partner to give me my job back. I have absolutely nothing." The words hung in the chilling air, a pathetic confession that completely shattered the remaining illusions in the room. A sharp, ear-piercing shriek ripped through the foyer. It was Madison. She pushed past a stunned waiter, her eyes wide with a frantic, unhinged terror. "You were fired!" Madison screamed, her voice cracking as she stared down at her groveling husband. "You told me you were going to the office every day this week. You let me put an offer on the Calabasas estate. You let me order the custom furniture." DeAndre did not answer her. He simply kept his face buried in his hands, his broad shoulders shaking as he wept on the cold stone. Madison stumbled backward, clutching her head, hyperventilating as the reality of her impending financial ruin crashed down upon her. The country club memberships, the luxury cars, the status she had weaponized against me for years were all evaporating in real time. From the corner of the room, Brenda watched the entire scene unfold. I could practically see the gears grinding in her calculating, opportunistic mind. She looked at Liam, pale and paralyzed by federal fraud. She looked at DeAndre, a weeping, unemployed disgrace. Then her eyes locked onto me. She saw the designer power suit. She saw the armed sheriffs taking my orders. She processed the words Vanguard Horizon and the sheer, terrifying magnitude of the wealth and power I now wielded. Without missing a beat, my mother executed the most shameless, sickening pivot of her entire life. She abandoned Vanessa instantly. Stepping over the shattered crystal of her favorite daughter's champagne flute, Brenda rushed toward me. Her arms were stretched wide, a frantic, desperate smile plastered across her face. "Riley, my brilliant daughter." Brenda cried out, her voice dripping with a sugary, manufactured warmth that made my stomach turn. "I always knew you were a genius. I told everyone you were destined for incredible things. Look at you. We are family, sweetheart. Please let us just go into the other room and talk this out. We can fix this." She reached out to grab my hands, fully expecting me to fold. She expected the desperate, approval-starved girl who had spent her entire life begging for scraps of maternal affection to finally welcome her embrace. I took a single deliberate step backward. Her hands grasped empty air. My eyes locked onto hers, entirely devoid of sympathy, warmth, or hesitation. The woman standing before me was not my mother. She was a parasite looking for a new host. "Family does not discard you for a cheating son-in-law," I stated, my voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings with glacial finality. "Family does not watch you get humiliated and applaud the people doing it. You chose your side, Brenda. Now you get to live with the consequences of that choice." I turned my gaze to address the entire group of them: Liam, Vanessa, Madison, DeAndre, and my mother. They were huddled together in the center of the foyer, surrounded by the disgusted stares of their former high society friends. "You all have exactly 30 minutes to vacate my property," I commanded. If you are still standing inside this house when the clock runs out, the sheriffs will arrest you for criminal trespassing." As if on cue, the lead corporate liquidator stepped forward. He did not hand them designer luggage or moving boxes. He dropped a roll of thick, heavy-duty black trash bags directly at Liam's expensive leather shoes. "Start packing," the liquidator said, his tone flat and administrative. The ultimate breakdown was spectacular. Vanessa lunged forward, screaming obscenities, her face twisted in a mask of pure feral rage. She raised her fists, ready to physically attack me, but a sheriff instantly stepped into her path, his hand resting firmly on his utility belt. He pointed a stern, commanding finger toward the grand staircase, ordering her to move. Liam had to physically drag his hysterical wife up the stairs, his own face buried in his chest to avoid the glaring eyes of the senior law partners who were already walking out the front door, actively deleting his contact information from their phones. I stepped back, allowing the chaotic, beautiful justice to unfold. 30 minutes later, the scene shifted into a cinematic slow-motion sequence of absolute retribution. The heavy oak doors were held open by the liquidators. Stepping out into the harsh, unforgiving sunlight of the Beverly Hills afternoon was the shattered remains of my former family. Liam and Vanessa walked first, their designer clothes rumpled and completely stripped of their prestige. They were hauling cheap, bulging black trash bags over their shoulders. Behind them came Madison Mascara, running down her cheeks in dark, jagged rivers, dragging a weeping DeAndre by his sleeve. Finally, Brenda stumbled out, looking suddenly aged and entirely panicked, clutching a single plastic bag filled with whatever jewelry she had managed to scrape off the vanity. They were paraded down the long manicured driveway, escorted by the armed sheriffs. The remaining elite guests stood by their luxury vehicles, watching in silent, captivated horror as the group was forced out onto the public curb, banished from the gates of the estate forever. They stood on the concrete, surrounded by garbage bags, with nowhere to go and absolutely no one to call. I did not walk out to the curb to gloat. I did not need to. I stood high above them on the grand, sweeping master balcony of the mansion. The warm California breeze caught the edge of my white suit jacket. In my hand, I held a fresh glass of vintage top-tier wine. I looked down at the pathetic cluster of people who had once made it their mission to destroy me. They were small, insignificant, and entirely powerless. A soft vibration buzzed in my pocket. I pulled out my phone. It was a direct call from my executive assistant. "Ms. Hayes," my assistant announced, her voice crisp and professional. "The paperwork just cleared. The additional $100 million in venture funding has been fully secured and transferred to the Vanguard accounts." "Excellent work," I replied, my voice steady and resonant. "Prepare the acquisition strategies for Monday morning. We have an empire to expand." I ended the call, slipping the phone back into my pocket. I looked out over the sprawling golden horizon, watching the sun begin to set over the hills, casting a brilliant, fiery glow across the city that I now owned a substantial piece of. A genuine, profound smile spread across my face. I raised my glass to the sunset, taking a slow, deeply satisfying sip of the vintage wine. The taste of victory was immaculate. Turning my back on this curb, the trash bags, and the toxic people who no longer existed in my reality, I walked back inside my spectacular new home. Behind me, the massive, heavy oak doors swung shut, locking into place with a deep, echoing thud. The past was closed forever. The future belonged entirely to me. The most powerful lesson from this narrative is that true empowerment is forged in silence and independence. When trapped in a toxic family dynamic where you are constantly undervalued, fighting for validation is a losing battle. Instead, the ultimate victory comes from redirecting that energy into building your own success, financial stability, and confidence on your own terms. True justice is rarely about dramatic revenge. It is about utterly outgrowing the selfish people who actively tried to keep you small and realizing their harsh opinions no longer define your life. Please share this message with someone today and comment below.